In 1942, Bing Crosby introduced a new Christmas classic to the world, White Christmas. The masterpiece of the legendary Tin Pan Alley composer Irving Berlin, White Christmas, not only broke sales records for the next 80 years, it also changed the landscape of American popular music. In a world centered on sheet music and songwriting, the song not only proved itself as a paragon composition, one which could be beautifully performed by hundreds of artists for more than half of a century, but also as a landmark sound recording. A recording which ushered in a new era for the music industry focused on individual artist interpretations, performances, and signature recordings. White Christmas is undoubtedly one of the most performed songs of all time, and a legendary sound recording which has captivated audiences for 8 decades.
The ones I used to know.
Hello there, it's Warren Hewitt here. Hope you're doing marvellously well. Welcome back to another episode of the series. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and if you hit the notification bell, you'll be notified when we have a new video. And if you're into production, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list and get a whole bunch of free goodies. The whole world knows White Christmas, thanks to the crooning talents of one of America's most beloved ballad singers, Bing Crosby. But before Bing could bring it to life, it was floating around in the creative imagination of one of Tin Pan Alley's most successful and prolific composers, Irving Berlin. Berlin was born in 1888, the son of a Jewish cantor in Imperial Russia, and his family emigrated to the United States when he was only 5 years old. After the death of his father, a 13-year-old Berlin set out on his own, working odd jobs and performing around New York. His first big hit was the 1911 classic, Alexander's Ragtime Band, and Berlin became one of the key composers of the Tin Pan Alley era. Tin Pan Alley refers to both a physical location, 28th Street in New York, home of the big music publishing houses of the time, as well as a way of referring to the music business of the early 20th century, an industry which centered in sheet music publishing and classic song forms. There are many legends and stories surrounding the creation of White Christmas, in part because Berlin told so many versions of its origins himself. In his book White Christmas, The Story of the American Song, Jody Rosen explains, he told his friend Miles Kruger, a historian of the Hollywood musical, that the song was composed in Beverly Hills. On his 1954 promotional tour for Paramount Pictures' White Christmas movie, Berlin unspooled a different version of the story nearly every day. The Los Angeles Mirror reported that Berlin had written White Christmas for a Broadway show called Stars on My Shoulder on an August afternoon in 1938 in his Beekman Place home in New York, a home that he hadn't actually moved into until 1947. In an exclusive interview with the American Weekly, Berlin recalled that he had written the song in 1940 for a review. When I wrote White Christmas in 1941, it was devised really to fit into a situation in the motion picture Holiday Inn. We know that the first physical existence of the song is found on the sheet music of Irving Berlin Music Company manuscript paper dated January the 8th, 1940.
The 48-measure draft, in the hand of Berlin's musical secretary, Helmi Kresse, reveals the song's most memorable element, its chorus, in its entirety. Kresse recalls that Berlin had come into the office early one morning and exclaimed, "I want you to take down a song I wrote over the weekend. Not only is it the best song I ever wrote, it's the best song anybody ever wrote." It wasn't until the song was performed by Bing Crosby on his NBC radio show, The Kraft Radio Show, that anyone heard this incredible piece of music. The performance occurred on Christmas Day, 1941, only a few weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Crosby recorded it for the film Holiday Inn in 1942 at Radio Recorders in Los Angeles.
I'm dreaming of a
The film Holiday Inn and its recording were released in the summer of 1942. This feels ironic considering its lasting association with the Christmas song, but the film was a catalogue of music from all holidays of the year, not just Christmas. And sure enough, White Christmas wasn't the biggest hit of the summer months. At first, it was overshadowed by another song from the film, Be Careful, It's My Heart. But by October, the song was topping the charts. In October the 31st, 1942, the song hit #1 on Billboard's best-selling retail records charts and stayed there for 11 weeks. White Christmas won an Oscar for Best Original Song in March of 1943, before returning to the number one spot again in December of both 1943 and 1944, the last Christmas season of World War II.
The start of America's involvement in World War II had a massive effect on Tin Pan Alley songwriting as songwriters churned out patriotic and war-themed songs. Major figures in the pop song industry even put together a committee, headed by Oscar Hammerstein II, to find a song to do for this war what George M. Cohan's Over There did for the last one. While there were novelty songs like Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, one of the most popular songs of the war era was, in fact, White Christmas, a nostalgic, melancholy ballad that mirrored the sentimental homesickness felt by American soldiers overseas. If we look at the lyrics in the song, which Bing so carefully brings to life, we are faced with a nostalgic longing for the gentle holiday peace of a pre-war past. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know. Nostalgia as a term was coined by a Swiss medical doctor who observed the phenomena in homesick soldiers. Even the Greek root of the word, nostos, looks back to Odysseus and his long-awaited return home from the war and the homesickness we associate with it. So we can see how nostalgia as a sentiment has historically been a powerful part of times of war, and how this song operates as both a validation of those homesick feelings and perhaps a balm to ease that sense of longing. There's a comfort in hearing the same song every Christmas, especially when one is away from home. The depiction of a perfect New England winter, where the treetops glisten and children listen to hear sleigh bells in the snow, was a secular, unifying image of an American Christmas for soldiers away from home. The Buffalo Courier Express wrote, "When Irving Berlin said 120 million people dreaming of a white Christmas, he provided a forcible reminder that we are fighting for the right to dream and memories to dream about." But it wasn't just Berlin's song. It was also the popularity of the specific Bing Crosby recording, the perfect song by the perfect artist at the perfect time. As referenced in the later 1954 film, White Christmas, Bing Crosby was an active part of the American war effort, broadcasting radio performances to the troops and touring with the USO to sing live for servicemen in Britain, Belgium, and France. He was the face of a morale-boosting effort during the war, one which continually relied on White Christmas as his signature song. White Christmas is a fantastic representative example of the changing landscape of the music industry during this time. On the one hand, it is the epitome of the old Tin Pan Alley measure of success. Sheet music sales were out the roof, and singers and orchestras across the country were performing it live. However, it also transcended the Tin Pan Alley model into what would become the newer industry standard of judging a song's popularity based on a specific sound recording. In part, because the war effort shrank the size of available dance band musicians, and thus raised the cost of hiring those who were available, radio airplay began to shift towards pre-recorded music, a practice that they had resisted on largely moral grounds prior to the war. Now remember, the peak of the radio era was characterized by real-time performances, which were broadcast live on local and national networks. Just like Bing's first performance of White Christmas on his radio show, on the Christmas after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. For many, playing a recorded track was seen as taking away jobs from hardworking live musicians. But in the midst of World War II, it became more and more necessary to rely on these sound recordings. And as sound recordings became accepted on the radio, they became the new measure of a song's popularity. Remember, prior to this time, if you asked someone about their favorite music, they would likely tell you about their favorite song, not as a specific performance recorded by a specific artist, but as a song that they might hear in a variety of ways, playing it on their piano at home, performed by their local dance band, or broadcast live on the radio. Whereas certainly since the rock and roll era, when we think about our favorite music, we think of a specific recording. That is the object of music to which we form our connections. And it is quite remarkable that White Christmas, which was a perfectly wonderful example of that old Tin Pan Alley industry model, it hit #1 on Billboard's best-selling retail records chart, was one of these first important records in that new model sense. And Bing Crosby's version of White Christmas is amazing because we can measure it by both standards, an incredibly popular song and an incredibly popular recording.
White Christmas is a song of yearning, capturing that common holiday tendency to nostalgically look back to Christmas past. While the 1942 recording introduced the song to audiences and established the tradition of White Christmas as a holiday classic for next 80 years, the original Decca recording got so much use it began to become unusable from the wear. Decca brought Bing into the studio in 1947 to record the version that you're most likely to hear today. Both the 1942 and 1947 cover versions feature Bing singing alongside the Trotter Orchestra and the Derby Singers. Since the intention was to recreate the success of the original, there are many similarities between them, beginning with the fact that both recordings remove Berlin's original verse. Many people don't realize that there's an additional section of the song beyond the short 54 words of its iconic chorus. In the classic Tin Pan Alley tradition, Berlin began the song with verse, setting up the premise for the song's main feature, the chorus. The verse begins in a complete surprise setting. The sun is shining, the grass is green, the orange and palm trees sway. There's never been such a day in Beverly Hills, LA. The verse continues, but it's December the 24th, and I'm longing to be up north, before launching into its title lyric. The verse is rarely performed and recorded, but its role was clearly defined in Berlin's Tin Pan Alley songwriting tradition. And it gives some insight into the idea of longing in the song, longing for that storybook Christmas of our memories. Berlin's own association with the holiday would have been complex. As a Jewish immigrant, he would have not celebrated it growing up, and the Christmas he depicts is a secular, cultural Christmas, rather than a religious holiday. And unlike many holiday classics of its time, he presents the seasons with a deep nostalgic longing. It could even be described as sadness, an emotion that he likely also associated with the season after the death of his 3-week-old son on December the 25th, 1928. This melancholy Christmas tone is brought out through not only Berlin's exquisite songwriting, but also the performance of Bing and his team of musicians. The flowing orchestral performance is made extra magical in the 1947 recording through the addition of flute and celeste or celesta, and Bing's own performance showcases the crooning mastering of his famous use of the microphone and the way he uses it to bring out his own vocal dynamics and emotive expression. The song had become such a holiday classic in its first decade of life that it became the centerpiece of a new film composed entirely around it, the 1954 classic White Christmas. The film is a time capsule of its historical moment, almost 10 years after the end of World War II. The film even begins with the performance of Bing's character, Captain Bob Wallace, singing White Christmas to the troops on the front lines, a reference to Bing's own experiences singing to the troops during the war. The film brought in an all-star cast alongside Bing, Danny Kaye, Rosemary Clooney, and Vera Ella. It immediately became a holiday classic, played on repeat during the Christmas season ever since. White Christmas was not only one of the first mega-hit songs of the 20th century, it was one of the first mega-hit recordings. In an era when song popularity was still largely calculated in sheet music sales, White Christmas took the lead on every front and forced the industry to recognize the impact of individual sound recordings of a specific song. There are some challenges when trying to quantify the exact records that the song holds, because its release predates the type of record keeping on sound recordings that are so standard today. But one thing is for certain. White Christmas, as both a song and as a sound recording, is one of the best-selling songs of all time. In 2009, the Guinness Book of World Records surmised that White Christmas was listed as the world's best-selling single in the first ever Guinness Book of Records, published in 1955, and remarkably still retains the title more than 50 years later. More recently, in 2019, it was still listed as the world's best-selling single with more than 50 million units sold. In 1999, members of the RIAA voted the song number 2 on their list of songs of the century, falling only behind Judy Garland's rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. It has been covered by countless artists, with most estimates listing the number of covers around 500 different versions in several different languages. What else can we say about this song? Bing Crosby is one of the greatest singers of all time. The song itself, White Christmas, is one of the most powerful associations I have with the Christmas period. Beyond obviously being a little kid and getting gifts and giving and receiving gifts and everything that comes around as a young child and the excitement of Christmas, I think you probably hear it half a dozen times or more on that lead up, whether you realize it or not. Every time you walk into a store, if you're there for a significant period of time during the Christmas period, you will hear that song played at least once while you're in there. There's good reason. It's one of the greatest songs ever written. And the fact that it's second only to Somewhere Over the Rainbow as being considered one of the most important songs of the 20th century makes absolute sense. As soon as I read that fact, I thought to myself, yeah, Somewhere Over the Rainbow is one of the most important songs ever written, let alone the 20th century, and will remain that way. And White Christmas is there standing shoulder to shoulder alongside it. Thank you ever so much for watching. If there's any of your favorite songs you want to talk about, it doesn't have to be a Christmas song. It can be anything, of course, or any artists or any albums. Let us know. We love doing the research. We love following up on music that we're passionate about. So please leave that down below. Thanks, everybody. Happy Christmas, happy holidays, happy New Year. Thank you ever so much for watching this. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, ciao, goodbye, happy Christmas. Sorry for the Americans. Merry Christmas.